Morning, everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about the Atlantic and some potential for development as we sort of start to wind down the season. If you look at where we're at, mid-October here, we're kind of on the back side of the hurricane season, and things definitely drop off as we get into November. But you can still get activity, especially in the Caribbean, western part of the basin, which is what we're going to talk about here in a second. Nothing highlighted over the next 7 days for development by NHC. The system we're going to talk about is probably right at the kind of the edge of that. So I would imagine there will be something tagged here on the outlook in a couple of days, assuming that things continue to evolve as expected. So the system of interest is this wave out over the central Atlantic. Right now it's firing some convection here along the intertropical convergence zone. And so there's the wave itself is kind of along here somewhere. If you look at the vorticity, the spin, you can see that there is a little bit of a signature here around 35 west embedded within this ITCZ. Nothing super robust at the moment. So upper divergence with that, also lower convergence, forcing convection. In terms of moisture, again, you can see your ITZZ signature here and this wave sort of in that, and a little bit amplified relative to the ITCZ around it, but overall, a pretty low amplitude wave doesn't really seem to be imminently developing. Another way to look at that is with ASCAT. We got a good hit from ASCAT B this morning. You can see there's southerly flow on the south side, and then kind of this a little bit of curvature, but mostly just northerly flow. And so you have this convergence line here, and your wave axis, and not a whole lot of organization at the moment, but it is firing some convection. In terms of what to expect large scale, we had an MJO passage just move through the basin. That's part of why the upper level winds are favorable. You get those upper easterlies on the backside, and some of that large-scale rising motion helped spawn this wave, and so it's a fairly favorable upper pattern. But with the pulse moving on, you can kind of see now you do have some large-scale sinking motion overhead, and so that may be a little bit of a challenge for the wave for the next few days, and that's part of why I don't expect any imminent development. But if you look, you have this other wave. It's a Kelvin wave that's right now kind of over the Central Pacific, and it's forecast to basically move east and should be over the Caribbean in about a week or so. And that's sort of when most models are indicating we might get something trying to form down there out of this wave. And so we'll take a look at that now. So GFS, it's kind of, you can see it has this wave. This is the vorticity and then the upper winds, and it sort of stalls it out over the Central Caribbean and then kind of moves north with the system as it intensifies. GFS kind of has this problem. You can see all these little small areas of vorticity here. GFS likes to amplify this grid scale vorticity under convection, and so it doesn't really seem super realistic with how it's doing that so far east. I think we'll in reality probably see the wave propagate a little bit more into the Caribbean before potentially trying to spin up, but something to watch. ECMWF is kind of the same thing. You can see so wave sort of just pulses on and off, doesn't really do much for a few days, and then as it gets into the Central Caribbean, if we go back to the 0Z run. Kind of gets there just south of Jamaica, and then over time tries to spin up. Again, it doesn't really seem like it'll be a very fast process. Probably looking at 7-8 days before we even have something that looks like a TC here. And with this trough to the north, again, that there's a lot of uncertainty and where that might pick it up or whether it might pick it up. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the other models that's done well this year is the AIFS. You can see this is showing again that amplified wave moving into the Caribbean. Doesn't really do much, and then it gets into the Southwest Caribbean, but rather than develop or amplify it like the Euro does, it kind of just buries it under this ridge, and it just jams it into Nicaragua and Central America. And that's one possible outcome. I don't see it being super likely that if this gets over the Caribbean that there won't be any development because the waters are very warm, and the upper level winds you can see here, there's large anticyclonic flow. So this is a favorable area for convection here. I find it hard to believe that if it gets over this area, it won't develop at least somewhat, but AI has done well this year, so it is one possible outcome. And one thing with this is that, we kind of have this fairly complex pattern. If you look at like day 8 here, so this is probably what something would be in the Central Caribbean. You have this trough trying to dive down off the eastern U.S. You have this ridge here over Central America, and so where the system is relative to that is important. Like I said, GFS kind of does some grid scale stuff here, and so it's taking the system out ahead of this trough. AIFS is just really weak and sort of buries it, so it gets caught under this ridge. But if you had something that was sort of more like the Euro, maybe in between the two, you could easily see something that's kind of slow moving, meanders here over the very warm water of the Central Caribbean. And so I'll show the ensembles in a second, and you'll see that is there's a lot of possible outcomes with this. And the other thing that's tricky is if you look at the pattern about 8 days, there's been a lot of run variability in this. If you go back a few runs, you can see GFS is just all over the place with this trough. Kind of seems like there's a lot of uncertainty tied back to the Pacific Jet and how that's evolving. Also, the East Pacific system, 91E, has trended a little bit weaker, and so there's a lot of uncertainty in just how favorable the Caribbean will be and what this upstream pattern is going to look like. And so that's part of what's driving this uncertainty. So we look at some of our models. This is the Google DeepMind Ensemble. This has generally done pretty well this year, and kind of in several cases given us a pretty clear indication of what the system might be doing. That's not the case at this point. The only thing it really does show is that most of the members that develop kind of do so in that region I talked about here in the Southwest or Central Caribbean. But you can kind of get a flavor for those different solutions I talked about. You can see some that are, seem like they don't really develop till we're almost in Nicaragua. Those kind of just go into land without much fanfare. You have another group that maybe tries to develop a little quicker or east like the GFS and quickly turns ahead of that trough over Hispaniola. Can't really rule that out. I don't think that's the most likely, but it's possible. Kind of the dominant solution, I would say, at this point does seem to be something trying to develop here in the Central Caribbean to the south of Jamaica. And from there, again, even if we do lock onto that, there's still some possibilities. It could try to drift west under that ridge, kind of like Sarah did last year. You could still see something get pulled more quickly, or it could meander up here to the Northwest Caribbean. And that solution would probably have the most chance for intensification because you would have a lot of time over warm water, probably moving slow, and favorable upper winds. You could get a strong storm out of that. As you can see, some of these members, drop the pressure pretty low with this. But like I said, there's probably just as likely a chance it could just be nothing that goes into Central America here. So until we get a better idea of exactly how robust this wave is going to be in the Caribbean, where it's going to organize sort of within this broader monsoon trough envelope, and what the pattern is, I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. EC Ensemble is kind of the same idea. Again, you can see we have our general consensus. We're going to have some kind of low pressure here to the east of Central America, but whether it's a stronger TC kind of trying to get in the Northwest Caribbean or just something weak that's heading right into Central America, it's really hard to say. And then if we go look at the GFS Ensemble, again, kind of the same thing, maybe a little bit more of a few more members that are kind of like the deterministic GFS in that it takes it across Hispaniola. But GFS also has a decent number of members that are sort of down here in the Southwest Caribbean as well. So looks like all of our ensembles are kind of showing the same idea in terms of lots of uncertainty, several possible outcomes. I think, it's more likely than not we're going to get a TC from this, but where it's going to go, how strong it's going to be, I think is a big question. The last thing we'll show is our basin scale halves. We've been running this year. It's running for 91E, but it also has a large outer domain that covers the entire Atlantic and East Pacific. This is out, it's 7-day forecast, so we've been kind of looking at this to try to evaluate some of the TC Genesis forecasts, and it doesn't really show necessarily as an explicit TC. It just kind of has this big and broad area of low pressure over the Central Caribbean in about 7 days. And so where a TC forms within that, again, is sort of subject to uncertainty, and a lot can change between now and then. So it feels like we've been watching this wave for a while, but still a little bit of ways to go before it becomes a system that's an investor, certainly something that could develop. But I think the conditions generally support the idea that unless it moves into land quickly, we'll get at least some kind of sort of tropical cyclone out of this. But where it goes, how strong it is, still very much up in the air. So we'll keep an eye on things and hope everyone has a great day.